Hey everyone, what's up? How's it going? This is Finite MTG, back with yet another draft of Innistrad. This time I am going to be going over a draft I've already done. I wouldn't be doing this unless I thought this was a really sweet one, as I know some people like this way of going over drafts, but most people just prefer the live ones. And with that, let's jump into the picks here. So, pack one, pick one. We've got a pretty underwhelming pack. I really like Elite Inquisitor. This thing is just like two mana, 2/2 first strike vigilance, protection from Innistrad, sort of. Just like Victim of Night is kill target creature not from Innistrad. So that's not literally how it works, but it's protection from so many things that this card is actually a really good, powerful effect. Otherwise, there's Silent Departure as another very strong card in the pack. Lumberknot can be pretty solid, but it takes some work to get it going. And of course, there's just like a Geist Flame. But yeah, ended up starting here with the Elite Inquisitor. I don't think this is the kind of card you should pass if you're trying not to force. All right, second pick here. Speaking of cards you shouldn't pass, we get a Sever the Bloodline. 4 mana, great removal spell, flashback on it, also excellent. This thing is a blowout versus tokens, and even without tokens, sometimes you can get a 2-for-1 without even casting it twice. You do have to watch out for anything you might have in common with your opponent, because it doesn't care about whether your opponent controls it or you do. It just cares about things having the same name. But yeah, this card is extremely good. Do not pass this card. Maybe someone took like a spider spawning over it, but still. This card is actually a blowout against spider spawning. Also, we have Abyssinian Priest as another pretty good card, but yeah, I mean, everything else in this pack is just so far below the Sever. There's not a lot of thinking to do here. All right, third pick. So now we have a couple decent blue flyers. Nothing really exciting compared to the first two picks, though. Particularly nothing I like in white, which is annoying because it makes me feel like we're going to have to drop that Elite Inquisitor. Kind of same with black. But with a couple nice blue flyers, I like Lantern Spirit a decent amount. In terms of relevant X1 hate, there's really only Geist Flame that you have to watch out for. And that ability can come in handy now and then, but most of the time it doesn't. Sometimes it'll let you repeatedly chump block something, but yeah, it's not super often that your opponent spends a removal spell on this and you get to bounce it. There's also a Moon Heron card I like quite a bit as well, but Moon Heron is a common, which means it should be easier to pick these up. It'll be read as less of a signal than passing this Lantern Spirit, and I like trying to keep my curve low. At this point, I already have a card that costs 4 mana, so took the Lantern Spirit over the Moon Heron, though sometimes I will make the opposite pick. Alright, now we have a very nice, interesting pack. We have a Bonds of Faith if we want to try to stay white. There's a Battleground Geist, and I believe we just picked up a Spirit. And there's also Moan of the Unhallowed. So I think Moan is the best card. It has a pretty similar couple of costs to the Sever the Bloodline, and it also, kind of like Spider Spawning, gets wrecked by Sever. Bonds of Faith is a really good card. It's what I think I would take here, if not for the Moan. But there's also a pretty strong argument for the Geist, in that we just saw a couple solid blue cards. This works really well with them, and it's a bit of a signal if we keep passing it. So ended up taking the Moan here, but I think you could make an argument for the other two cards pretty reasonably. All right, at this point we see a couple blue 4 mana cards, and suddenly I'm feeling pretty good about that Lantern Spirit pick, trying to keep my curve low. Really nothing exciting in black or white. Otherwise, there's like an Ambush Viper, but yeah, we have a Grasp of Phantoms here. Not a terrible card. Flashback is a little expensive. I don't like that it's a sorcery either, but I mean, if you're aggressive enough, this card is pretty good. And yeah, there's just a Moon Heron. And even though I think, again, passing like a blue uncommon, that's, pretty good. relatively late could be read as a signal in addition to that Battleground Geist. I did end up going with the Moon Heron here, just because, like I already said, the Grasp is really at its best in the aggressive decks, and right now we're set up to be something potentially a little more controlling. So yeah, I like Moon Heron a good amount in this format. All right, next up here, we get a pack that is not super exciting. Definitely you can see a few unplayables hanging around in here. As I've said in the past, I do like Makeshift Mauler, but because I really don't want more than one, I try to pick them up later. And as I said before during that Lantern Spirit pick, we are trying to keep our curve low. So a Vampire Interloper is really pretty nice here, even in a deck that's mostly controlling. This is about as well as you can do for a 2-drop. And yes, not being able to block in a controlling style deck is not ideal, but being able to play a 2-powered card that gets in for 2 damage over the course of the game is definitely a pretty powerful effect. So happy to pick up that one there. Next up, we have a pretty weak pack here. Nothing really exciting for any deck, in my opinion. I think Smite is a card you could main deck, but it really makes more sense coming out of the sideboard. And so that pretty much leaves us with a Walking Corpse and a Ghoul Colors Chant. So one interesting thing is that we are positioned right now to be blue-black, which means that we are going to have access to the highest number of zombies. So the Chant, if it's going to be good anywhere, should be good in a blue-black deck. On the other hand, we are just trying to keep our curve low. Walking Corpse is not an exciting 2-drop, unlike the Vampire Interloper, but it is just a totally fine one. Just a Bear is a playable card in this format, so I actually took that one here over the Ghoul Colors Chant, try to get some zombies before we go for this zombie value. All right, next up here, there's really nothing almost even playable in this pack. There are some white cards that you could put in your deck, and it wouldn't be too embarrassing. I don't love either of them. I think Elder Cathar is solid in a very human-heavy deck, but that's not where we are positioned to be. And Corpse Lunge is not a card I like. It's a little too hard to set up, but it is potentially a removal spell. And if you end up with some self-mill or that kind of thing, this card can be fine. So ended up just taking a black card that I don't like, but there's a chance it makes our deck. And now, speaking of zombies, we get a sort of late Ghoul Raiser. This card is pretty narrow though, so it's not super surprising to see it here that late, not compared to this Geist Flame, which should have been taken a long time ago. This card is solid. But Ghoul Raiser, sometimes it's a Grey Ogre, sometimes it's Grey Ogre that draws you a card. It's not too common to get a zombie that's very good, but it is relatively easy to loop Ghoul Raisers, which is pretty sweet. And yeah, happy to get one here. Alright, now in this pack, the green cards are not super exciting, and we're not pivoting for a Fox. So that leaves us with a Brain Weevil. I don't like this card too much, but one thing that I think is important to note about it is one of the few ways of triggering Morbid without paying any mana. So you can play this turn 4, and then, for instance, untap turn 5, you can have that Banshee that gives something -4/-4, sack your Brain Weevil, and then play the Banshee, which would be a great turn. But yeah, we don't have a Banshee at this point. Not super interested in a Weevil. Alright, now we get 2 super bad black cards, and I ended up just taking the Thraben Purebloods over either of them. There's not a huge chance we go into white. We've passed a lot of medium white cards, but at this point, there's a non-zero chance this thing makes my deck, and I think there is nearly a 0% chance I play either of those, so Purebloods there. Alright, pack 1, pick 12, we get a nice late Lost in the Mist. We haven't seen a ton of blue this pack, so it's not super clear whether we are supposed to be in blue. However, this card is not bad. Costing 5 mana is pretty annoying, but once you get there, it's a pretty powerful effect. If your opponent has a read on the Lost in the Mist, it gets a lot worse, of course, but if you're able to play it, sometimes it can be a pretty big blowout. And pick 13 here, we take just a wooden stake in case we face that dedicated vampire deck that we never seem to face when we pick up a wooden stake. Passing a Curse of Oblivion, a card that is technically graveyard hate, but still very, very bad. And I believe we take a mountain here over the Furor of the Bitten, try to put someone into red, and a swamp. Alright, pack 2, pick 1. We have a couple nice interactive cards. I don't really like Runechanter's Pike. I think it's a little too hard to set up, and we don't have any self-mill or anything either at this point. There's a Dissipate, which I like quite a bit. Cancel in general is fine, but I rate this thing closer to like a Cancel plus Scry 1 because it has that Exile clause, which is super relevant in this format. Otherwise, there's a Deadweight, and blue is the color we're not quite as certain that we want to play, and Deadweight is a very, very nice removal spell, not a card I want to pass, so I ended up passing the Dissipate, even though I do like the card quite a bit. You just don't always have one blue to hold up. Alright, and we are past a very painful card here in the Gavany Township. It's kind of weird because I'm not sure what colors the person passing to me is in. If they're passing me this township and they're passing something like a Murder of Crows, I think if you're in either of these colors, this is a card you just take because it's really, really insane and difficult to interact with, of course. But Murder of Crows, extremely good blue card. I was talking before about how I think this thing should be printed at 3 power. That would make it a little more reasonable, but hey, I'm the one with it in my deck, so I guess I'm glad it has 4 power. Yeah, at this point, now we're thinking that blue is probably something we are supposed to play, and we're happy about that. Alright, and now we get 3 very good cards for the blue-black deck. We get a Falconwrath Noble, so 4 mana for a 2/2 flying, not the best stats in the world, but that ability is so sick. It's that nice Blood Artist ability, but you get a relevant body, especially relevant for limited too. So a lot of the time you get to just poke your opponent over and over with this thing, and then if anything trades off, your opponent is taking some major damage and you're gaining quite a bit of life. This card is very, very good. Passing a Moan of the Unhallowed and a Claustrophobia. I think at this point I take the Claustrophobia over the Moan if the Falconwrath Noble were not in the pack, and part of me wanted to try to do the thing where I take the good blue card and wheel a playable black card trick, but I don't think there's any way that Moan or Noble wheel. Those cards are just too good. So I ended up going with the Noble, of course. Alright, pack 2, pick 4. We get a card that, again, looks very good and is not super easy to enable in the Morkrut Banshee. So 5 mana for a 4/4. You can give something -4/-4, but only if something died the turn you played it. You can get this to work with that 4 mana 1/1 that you're sacking to make an opponent discard 2 cards, but then you're playing that 4 mana 1/1 in your deck, so definitely a trade-off there. Otherwise, there's another Makeshift Mauler. Now is about the time I'd be interested in picking one of those up, but as is, still decently happy with a Morkrut Banshee. We'll see if we ever actually get there on the Morbid. Alright, now we see pretty late Abyssinian Priest, and once again, a very late Silver Inlaid Dagger. This thing, I mean, it's no Bone Splitter, right, but this thing is still very cheap, very powerful to equip. Boosting power is so good. It's good at allowing your creatures to trade up. It's good at pushing damage. Not sure how many humans we'll end up with in this deck. Probably not many, as we already mentioned that we are likely to be in the zombie deck, but yeah, don't pass this card if you can help it. It's very good. All right, next up, pack 2, pick 6. Um, Really close one in my opinion between these blue 4-drops. The makeshift mauler, remember we do want to have some number of zombies, though one annoying thing about the blue zombies is that they're kind of non-bow with the black ones. The black zombie cards care about returning zombies from your graveyard to your hand, and the blue ones care about exiling creatures from your graveyard. So, really weird design. I think zombies would be a lot better in this set if they were synergistic instead of kind of thrown together like this. Um, and there's just a Moon Heron, which is a card, again, I like quite a bit. I really like being able to get in the air, and I did take the Moon Heron. I think it was probably correct, but you could easily take the Mauler here, and I think that would be totally defensible too. All right. Well, feeling a little bit better after not taking that makeshift Mauler, as now we get a Stitched Drake. This card is very difficult to cast, both the double blue and the requirement of exiling a creature from the graveyard, but a 3/4 flyer is worth those things. It's just a really nice body for this format. And Forbidden Alchemy, as much as I would love that card, I don't think I want to pick it over something like a Stitched Drake. This is also like the second Markov Patrician in a row, something like that. This card is reasonable, though it's not as good as the Alchemy or the Drake, in my opinion. All right, next up, pack 2, pick 8. We see 2 terrible blue cards for what we're trying to do, and there are 2 pretty good white cards in Rebuke and Abyssinian Priest. I think the Priest is a lot better. They're both conditional, right? Rebuke only hits attackers, and this thing only taps non-humans. But Abyssinian Priest, as a tapper, I mean, it can attack, which is pretty decent. It can switch which creature you want to tap. It can tap the 2 creatures per turn cycle, whereas Rebuke is a lot less flexible and powerful, and it's something you can get a read on as well if your opponent passes pretty suspiciously. So I ended up hate drafting the Priest over the Rebuke. All right, now we get that nice Dissipate all the way around the table. Happy to add that one to the deck over a card like Frightful Delusion, which I don't think is any good, and same with the Fen Snake. Late Doomed Traveler, by the way, but also a late Dissipate. All right, pack 2, pick 10. Right now our curve is looking very high and would love some more defensive creatures. We passed a Walking Corpse this pack, not a card you normally want very many of, but Typhoid Rats is basically the same thing but better for what we're trying to do. We don't care too much about trying to push damage on the ground, and we do care about having a nice cheap blocker that's going to trade up just about 100% of the time. So happy with the rats there. All right, and now we get another Brain Weevil if we would like one to go with that Banshee. I don't think I would ever play more than one of these unless I had to. One of the problems with this card is, I mean, of course it's a 1/1, but I already mentioned that Geist Flame is the biggest problem for it there. But the other big problem is it's just a terrible top deck, and you really want to minimize cards like that in your deck. Typhoid Rat's not the most impactful top deck necessarily either, but generally going to be a better one than Brain Weevil. So yeah, took the Weevil, not necessarily planning to play it. All right, at this point I have no respect for either of these cards, so I just took a Moon Mist. Figured might make somebody else's deck a little worse by not picking one up. And at this point, I think I took the Curse over the Shovel. I mean, it's your choice of unplayable graveyard hate card, so yeah. All right, and I think I passed the Fury here for the Plains, though I might have taken it. Doesn't really make a huge difference. And Plains anyway. All right, so we are in blue-black. We care about zombies. I think there's some kind of blue-black zombie card that would be pretty powerful and synergistic and just a cool card to open, and look at that. We got it. Grimgrin Corpseborn. 5 mana for a 5/5. Enters tapped, doesn't untap during your untap step, but you can sack something to untap it, put a counter on it, and then when you attack with it, you can blow something up, put a counter on it. This card is excellent, perfect for what we're trying to do. Really nice to get at pack 3, kind of a surprise. Don't even have to worry about having to splash it or anything like that. Passing some good removal spells, but hey, never going to complain about opening an on-color mythic that is perfect for our deck. Alright, I might end up complaining about this pack a little bit. It is not a very exciting one. Remember, our curve is very high, and yeah, this pack just doesn't really have anything exciting for us. It does for a green player, has Dark Thicket Wolf and a Travel Prep, but we are looking at like a Battleground Geist or a Think Twice, kind of a slant rhyme there. Traveler's Amulet also in the pack, though not something I would consider at this point. Believe I took the Think Twice. I already said we don't really have any self-mill, but even a clunky divination is a divination that we would be happy to play in this kind of strategy. And yeah, the Geist, we already have some very powerful, expensive cards. We just picked one up, pack 3, pick 1. So I think we can do better than that card. Well, or maybe not, as we are past yet another. And also Falconwrath Marauders. If this thing connects with your opponent once, it's just almost impossible to beat. Very annoying card for limited. I wish this thing were designed differently or not printed at rare. However, there is a Silent Departure, which is quite a bit better, in my opinion, than the Battleground Geist, as it is nice, flexible, cheap interaction. Note that there's a Ghoul Raiser also in the pack if we are hoping to pick up a second one of those. And I do like Sensory Deprivation quite a bit as well, but I think Departure is just an excellent card in the format, so passing our third Battleground Geist here. Alright, so we see a couple cards that I think are very close in terms of how much we would like each of them. So there is, of course, Victim of Night. As I already said, destroy target non-Innistrad creature. But there's also Armored Scab, which 3 mana 1/4 is a nice defensive body. It's a zombie. It puts stuff into the graveyard. So we have just a classic removal effect versus a card that our deck would really like in terms of synergy, filling out our curve. And I ended up going with the Victim, thinking maybe I can pick up an Armored Scab a little bit later. Not sure if this was correct. I think you could make an argument for taking the Scab, trying to wheel the Tribute, though I think Edicts generally are quite poor. So I'm not sure that would be worth it, but maybe. Alright, next up we do get Ghoul Raiser, and yeah, otherwise there's just not much going on in the pack. Relatively late Chapel Geist, but I'm sure it'll be taken out of the pack sometime soon. Okay, next up here, this pack is a huge whiff. Really nothing in it is exciting, and barely any cards in the pack are playable. I think I took a Cellar Door, the most euphonious phrase in the English language. And I don't really like the card. It's a lot of mana to not necessarily do a whole lot. One of the things, in addition to what I already said about the zombie archetype being really kind of awkwardly constructed, is that a bunch of the zombies in this format are tokens. And when you have cards that care about exiling zombies from the graveyard or returning zombies from your graveyard to your hand, that just throws in another whole level of awkwardness. So yeah, not a big fan of the door. Alright, pack 3, pick 7, we see a painfully late Mausoleum Guard. This card is very good. Not sure whether it's better than like just a Midnight Haunting, but yeah, super good card. Probably would have a strong white deck if we chose to go that route. Makes me wonder who took the Gavany Township from pack 2. But for us, there's a Frightful Delusion. Not a card I love, but it is a card we could play. It can be a blowout of sorts if you're able to Rune Boggle someone, but yeah, passing Pitchburn Devils, which is a card that I think is solid, and a Neonate, which a lot of people think is really bad because they've had the experience of just playing it and having it die. But if you're able to put like a Spectral Flight on this thing, or really just do any number of things to make sure it can get in at least once. It's not going to suicide itself very often, the attack after that. So I do think that the Neonate is an underrated card. All right, next up, there's Makeshift Mauler number 3. Unfortunately, I would like to have one of these in the deck, but Typhoid Rats, remember our curve is just a bit high, as we'll see in a second when we see the deck after the whole draft. And yeah, I just want something to trade up, block early. All right, before we passed Ghoul Caller's Chant for a Walking Corpse, now we've gotten a few zombies, including Grim himself, and now we have Ghoul Caller's Chant to get him back. So that's pretty nice here. Much better than a Cellar Door or a Bitterheart Witch. Pretty much when you see people play this card, it's only for the black rare Curse, which is a very powerful card, but I don't think you're supposed to put a 5-mana 1/2 Death Touch into your main deck to try to find that Curse. It's just too awkward in too many situations. I do think that if you play against a deck that's extremely weak to the Curse of Death's Hold, I should say, then it's somewhat reasonable to board the Bitterheart Witch in, but no, I don't think this is a card you should start in your deck. Alright, pack 3, pick 10. Talk about a late Chapelgeist. This card is so much better than the red and black cards in the pack. However, we do get a Traveler's Amulet, not a card that should go this late. And if you think about the contents of our deck, we actually do have a lot of cards that are double blue and double black. So this thing is actually surprisingly important mana fixing for us. And here comes that Ghoul Raiser number 2, all the way around the table for us. Very nice. Adding this to the deck means that Chant gets that much better. Ghoul Raiser number 1 now isn't too embarrassing. And remember, we do have Grimgrin, we have the Stitched Drake, and yeah, we have Walking Corpse as well. Alright, now we get a nice late Crossway Vampire. This card is totally fine. It shouldn't be going this late compared to the other cards in the pack. And at this point, I think we took a Furor of the Bitten, but there's just so little going on in the pack. I mean, you could take anything here. And I think we probably took another one and a land. So with that, let's take a look at how the deck turned out. All right, so this is the deck. Few things to note. Even with all my talk about trying to lower the curve, you can still see we have a few 5-mana cards, a bunch of 4s. Number of 3s is pretty reasonable, but we're really lacking 2-mana creatures. Fortunately, we do have some Typhoid Rats to make up for that. And like I already mentioned, the Traveler's Amulet did find its way into the deck. Look at that. We have Dissipate, Stitched Drake, we have Murder of Crows, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 double black cards. We were able to do a nice 7-9 mana base plus the amulet, sort of getting up to 8 and 10, which made things quite a bit easier. And yeah, I think this deck is pretty good. Didn't have any room for the 4-mana Mind Rots on a creature, but I think this deck is super nice. Alright, back for round number 1 with our very nice Dimir zombie deck. And we have a hand that looks pretty playable to me. Ghoul Raiser not seemingly doing a whole lot at this point in the game, but still not terribly embarrassing to play it out here. Dissipate looking uncastable, but that's fine. Opponent has a Caravan Vigil to start things off. Finding a Plains. They have a Dark Thicket Wolf. So now we're going to play the Lantern Spirit. Dark Thicket Wolf is insanely good. It functions so often like a 2-mana 4/4. It's very difficult to block. But eventually we do have the plan of Ghoul Raiser plus the equip of the dagger. We do have to play out the Ghoul Razor here, even though it doesn't return anything, and just attack with the Spirit, planning to trade the Ghoul Razor for the Scholar if it flips and attacks, and if not, planning to play Swamp next turn, equip Dagger to it, and hold up Dissipate. Holding up the bounce on the Spirit as well. Opponent has a One-Eyed Scarecrow. A lot of people think this card has reach. It does not. So at this point, we just equip the Dagger to the Ghoul Razor, again planning to trade with the Wolf, and now that the Lantern Spirit is just a 1/1, we actually want to leave it back in case the Civilized Scholar comes in to try to deal us damage, because, yeah, poking in for 1 point of damage, not super impactful, and preventing 5 damage can be very impactful. Opponent loots Traveler's Amulet and sacks it. Committed to the Bant. No attack, making sense here in the face of the Ghoul Razor. And now we draw a Deadweight. So you might think that the Dark Thicket Wolf is what we want to deadweight here, because that's the thing preventing us from attacking, which is kind of annoying, and it's just a scary card. But I decided I'd actually rather get rid of the Civilized Scholar here, because the Scholar is just allowing them to churn through their deck. You can see they've already looted away a couple lands, and I don't want them to have that kind of long-term advantage, so killed the Scholar and decided to play this turn without holding Dissipate up. So attack for 3, then re-equip to the Ghoul Razor. And part of the reason I think it's fine to play this turn without Dissipate up is because we do have that Silent Departure. So if we get triple blue at some point, we can bounce something we didn't counter and then counter it on the way back down. Always trying to make this trade, even though they didn't attack before, meaning they probably do have some kind of trick. Okay, they do. Seem to take their turn, so I'm pretty happy about that, all things considered. And now we get to go for an attack for 3 in the air. And we did hit the triple blue, so going to spend this turn with the Silent Departure plus Dissipate. The opponent has a lot of mana, and they haven't done very much with it, so I think we can safely assume that we're not getting baited into countering the Wolf with this Dissipate. So we make that play, and the opponent goes for this Prey Upon while we don't have blue mana up. And even if we did have blue mana up, like, it's card disadvantage for them either way. So not too unhappy about that trade. Draw a nice Moon Heron. Happy to have the Scarecrow off the battlefield as we draw and equip that. Opponent passes here. And with all that mana open, I'm very aware of Rebuke, a card that can destroy an attacking creature, so I make sure to play a Falconwrath Noble pre-combat here to get a drain out of them if they do have the Rebuke. In the game, the opponent did a decent job pretending like they didn't have it, but in the end, they did end up playing it. So we got that nice drain as expected and re-equipped. Opponent has a Mulch, not a card you want to be top decking at this point in the game. And a Battleground Geist. Wonder if they were in our draft. We passed so many of those. Fortunately for us, we have 7 mana. We draw a 2 mana card and 5 mana remaining to flash back the bounce spell, the Silent Departure. So we get in for 4 here. And then next turn we have re-equip to the zombie, attack with just that setup to leave the Falconwrath Noble online. So that is the play we end up going for here as we draw land. Opponent eventually decides to block. We get a couple drains. Pretty good deal. We equip the dagger to the Falconwrath, bluffing a second Dissipate. And the opponent goes tap tap concede. So Pretty good game one. All right, game two. We have a keepable hand here, a little bit awkward. We don't need that many swamps, but think twice should be a solid way of getting out of this awkward position. Opponent has a turn one amulet. We have a turn one rat. And Dark Thicket Wolf, which we are very happy to have the rats against. Though we were planning on playing Think Twice here, definitely jamming this Interloper instead. Opponent has a Mulch. Finds a Moorland Haunt. And two creatures in the graveyard. So at this point, the Interloper is looking very bad. It's going to trade with a Spirit token because of this. And you might think they don't have white mana for this, but of course with the Amulet here, they can have this online next turn, and that's going to be, just like the Gavany Township, a very strong card that's difficult for most limited decks to interact with. So I believe I actually ended up deadweighting the Wolf here. Yeah, figured I need to try to push damage against this Moorland Haunt. Even though we are giving them another Spirit, it was pretty much bound to happen. Might as well get in with the rats. And yeah, as predicted, opponent passes with the Moorland Haunt up to trade for our Interloper. We go for a Think Twice here just to see if we find anything that changes our play. We do not. I'm not sure why this thing is outlined in red. We went for an attack all here, of course knowing that the Interloper pretty much has to trade for a Spirit at some point. Which it will. Still get in for 3 damage, which isn't nothing. And at this point, we have Ghoul Caller's Chant and Stitched Drake, so I'm trying to save the Chant until we can get 2 zombies back, which I think will be a nice way of spending it. Unfortunately, missing double blue, which is pretty awkward. And yeah, just attacking for 2. They're not going to make Spirit and Chump Block. They're going to wait until they can try to trade. And I believe I ended up flashing back Think Twice here rather than playing the Lantern Spirit. Oh no, I did play the Lantern Spirit, sure. But of course, Lantern Spirit in the face of a Spirit token, not the best Magic card ever. Though I guess once we get the zombie to trade for hopefully a couple spirits, it'll start looking better. And yeah, that's what we attacked with here. Silent Departure, unfortunately, being a sorcery, in case they have any shenanigans, and they do. Spidery Grasp once again. No Dissipate available with only 1 blue mana, but we did make them sweat here by casting the Think Twice in the middle of combat. They trade the Grasp for the zombie, and we play the Silver Inlaid Dagger. And we're actually very happy to have the zombie in the graveyard, because as soon as we hit double blue, we're going to play Stitched Drake, exile the Interloper, and then if the Drake dies somehow, then we get to Ghoul Caller's Chant, get back the corpse and the Drake. But you can see, of course, the crazy amount of work the Moorland Haunt is doing for the opponent as they pass again, and we do find double blue. So now we are able to go for that Drake, exile the Interloper like we said, and equip it. Is going to be more impactful than equipping the 1 toughness creatures at this point. And yeah, we'll see what the opponent has in store for us. So attack for 4. No blocks as predicted. Opponent goes for some shenanigans. They go for a Naturalize on the dagger, and if you remember last game, the dagger was a big part of us being able to win, as we draw relatively medium-sized to small-sized creatures, just helping trade up. I thought it was pretty important, and I wanted the Drake to die, did not want the dagger to die, so I ended up countering this Naturalize. At this point, I'm actually wondering if they have a Rebuke again. They did show it to me the first time. And they seem to think they tricked me because they have now a Rebuke. But as we know, of course, we get to Ghoul Caller's Chant, Nice 2-for-1 for only 1 mana. And we get to drop a walking corpse, which we will suit up with the dagger to get through that scarecrow next turn. So feeling like we are in very good shape, all things considered. Opponent has an Ulvenwald Mystics, and we get to suit up the corpse, which sounds kind of funny. Opponent trades with Scarecrow, and very kindly of them, they just put a creature back into our graveyard. So now we can cast the Stitched Drake once again, and drop a Swamp, re-equip. Now it's a 5/4 that the Scarecrow's off the battlefield. They make a Spirit. They have a Civilized Scholar, so some point soon they'll be able to trade for the Drake. Oh, or we could just draw Sever the Bloodline. So we already said during the draft this thing's a blowout versus tokens. We're about to see why. So yeah, Sever the Bloodline, leaving up double blue, once for the Departure and once for the Lantern Spirit. Opponent says Arg, and get a nice attack in for 7 now. For the first time, the Lantern Spirit is actually able to get in for damage. The opponent is currently out of creatures in the graveyard. They do have that Civilized Scholar, which means they should be able to find more soon. They did discard a creature, and they have a Battleground Geist. Didn't attack with anything. Not sure that's the play they want to make there. The Ulvenwald Mystics maybe should just attack into the rat so they can make more spirits. But at this point, I think a little bit about what's going on here, which is they discarded a creature, so they're able to make 1 blocker. We still have that Sever the Bloodline flashback available to us. And because the opponent is in the habit of making these tokens at instant speed, we're not going to be able to blow out multiple tokens very easily. So I decided to exile the Battleground Geists, and then they'll make a Moorland Haunt token, which will chump block the Stitched Drake, meaning we can hit them for 2 damage in the air still. You can also Silent Departure there, but I think this play is just better. And yeah, the opponent does chump, and we didn't even use the Silent Departure. Scholar does not transform because they did not find a creature. They play a Moon Heron. And so the Sever the Bloodline is all used up, but now we can Silent Departure that Moon Heron, re-equip the dagger to the Lantern Spirit, and now we'll have a 4-powered creature and a 3-powered creature, both with evasion. So yeah, 2 lethal threats. The opponent is going to be done now. Not too much they can have with only 1 card in hand. They don't have the Moorland Haunt up either. So we go to combat, attack, 2 lethal threats. Opponent has Snapcaster for Rebuke, which is pretty crazy. So very relevant now that we had 2 lethal threats. And yeah, they did Rebuke the 3/4. I guess they're only out at this point as I think it's targeting the Lantern Spirit, and I bounced that. But yeah, not today. All right, time for round number 2. All right, so we are back for round number 2. We are on the play with 3 lands and really nothing we can cast, which is super awkward. However, we do have like 3 of the best cards in the deck in our hand. So yeah, I found this one just a little bit too difficult to say no to, because if we do draw the lands, it feels like it'll be difficult to construct a way for us to lose, especially if the opponent doesn't beat us down. And fortunately, they do not, leading on Mountain and Swamp, which is very interesting, and not having anything. Really awkward that we didn't have Dissipate up turn 3, but fortunately, not relevant. So, get to jam a Moon Heron now, trying to draw removal from that, but nothing happens. Yeah, now we play, well, now we attack, then we play a Murder of Crows, I believe. and that's actually enough for the opponent to concede. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. They were clearly missing some way of impacting the game, so 7 power in the air, yeah, that'll end the game pretty fast. All right, back for game number 2 of round 2, and yeah, we have this really awkward one lander, just a snap mulligan. And we end up with this hand, which is also pretty awkward, but after we put back the Banshee, as long as we draw a swamp and maybe even like a rat sometime soon, things aren't too embarrassing for us. Opponent leads on swamp rats, and so we play swamp dagger, and then they have Gatstaff Shepherd. They get to poke us for 1 with their rats, and yeah, you guessed it, we do not draw a spell we can cast. So brief mention of whether it was a punt for me to play the dagger out turn 1. Short answer, no, I don't think it was, even though obviously like I would love to prevent the Gatstaff thing from transforming. They played a black land and a red land, so really there aren't too many 2-mana werewolves in red and black that we could be worried about here. And if we do draw a 2-mana card, even if it's like Think Twice, then we'll really want to be able to spend our mana here. So even though we did get punished in a pretty big way for playing out the dagger, I don't think we're supposed to wait, though I think that maybe if you're on the play, maybe if your deck isn't super good at using all of its mana, you can wait. But yeah, here I think it was reasonable to just play it out. And yeah, the opponent flips the thing, hits me for 4, not looking like it's going to be a very close game. They play another werewolf, and this time I draw a spell, and it's sort of a land, which is funny, but casting this land, if you will, is still pretty nice in this spot. So we bluff a Victim of Night here, and they play a Gavany Township. So game 1 they showed us Swamp and Mountain, and now they're showing us Abzan mana plus Gavany Township. So really, really insane mana base from the opponent, but apparently it seemed to work out, and I guess we know what happened to the game 1. They must have been color screwed fairly badly. So they just chonk us for a bunch of damage. We crack the amulet, find a swamp. They flip their thing into a 4/6. We have Sever the Bloodline or Moan that we could play this turn. Moan doesn't even trade for either of their werewolves, and Sever does get 1 out of the way, but they just play any land and we're basically dead to Township. I think we're just too slow pretty much regardless, so I ended up just scooping it up here. I figured that my odds of winning this game are so slight that it's just worth saving the information of Sever the Bloodline. All right, now for game 3 of round 2. Get a very nice hand here. Lands of both colors, Interloper, Dagger, and a Deadweight. Victim of Night and Stitched Drake looking a little difficult to cast at this point, but hopefully we'll get there eventually. So we drop the Dagger turn 1. We've learned nothing. Just kidding. Opponent has a turn 1 Rat, and we have Interloper, which we are just planning on turning into a 4/1 here. Drew Dissipate, by the way, and now we're drawing rats. But yeah, does not change the plan. Hitting for 4 on turn 3 is pretty big game, especially in the air. Opponent has their natural Abzan mana base, and we are stuck on 2 lands here. So now I think for a bit about whether I want to play like a Deadweight or play the rats, and I decide I'd rather play the rats here, just because there aren't too many ways the opponent can have of getting the rats out of the way and getting the villagers in. And if the villagers ends up flipping, then it's not going to stay a zero powered creature even with the Deadweight on it. So they attacked with both, which I thought was interesting. Figured they probably have some morbid card coming, but still blocked with the rats. They did have a morbid card coming. I was worried about the boar, but they actually had a woodland sleuth. So getting back the villagers, pretty reasonable turn for them. And we are still on 2 lands, but the opponent has taken 8 damage from this flyer, and they're about to take 4 more. Yeah. So now I think there's a really interesting decision about whether to play Deadweight this turn. So pretty much what I'm thinking about is if I draw Swamp for Victim of Night and they just play the Werewolf next turn, I'm going to wish that I could target this woodland human thing. And I don't want to do that if I've already put a Deadweight on it. The other thing is if they play a Werewolf and then I don't draw a land, then I'd like to be able to cast a spell to prevent their Werewolf from flipping. So I actually ended up just passing the turn here. And we take 3 damage. And they did play just the Werewolf like we were discussing. And we do not draw land, so we're in that second scenario. So we attack with 4. And now we get to play a Deadweight on the villagers. Yeah, we're just praying at this point for no removal spell on the Interloper because that is how we win the game if we're able to get there. So the opponent plays a Gavany Township, goes ahead and activates it main phase, and yeah, suddenly that dead-weighted creature is still a relevant threat, and even though our life total is pretty high, it's still feeling like we are in some serious danger. With the 1 swamp open, they could easily have Tragic Slip. If they have that, well, I mean, that's game over. So they come in with everything, and I don't know whether the slip is coming, but as some of you might have guessed, they already played the Township this turn, signaling that that was their draw for the turn. So yeah, they did not draw the Tragic Slip, and the little Interloper that could would have dealt the opponent all 20 damage. Alright, back for round 3, game 1 against Joralf Jägerstad. I don't know how to pronounce that, but hopefully I got close. Regardless, this person's a very good player, Magic Online grinder, and not someone I've beaten too many times, so hopefully we'll be able to get a good result here. End up mulliganing into this really awkward hand, and I stare at it for a long time, not sure what to put to the bottom. And I end up going with Ghoul Raiser here. We don't have a zombie to get back. Ghoul Caller's Chant can just act as a raise dead effect if nothing else. And I think I really want double blue, and yeah, still missing double black. So, lead on Island. Normally this deck wants to lead on Swamp for Victim of Night, but there's no chance we will draw and be able to play Victim of Night on turn 2 anyway, so it doesn't matter. We do like to have Island Swamp in play on turn 2, though, so we can play a double blue or double black card on turn 3. Opponent has Avacyn's Pilgrim, which we narrowly decided not to deadweight. Pretty much my logic is, even though it speeds them up, my ability to win the game doesn't hinge on them playing a fast game or not. My ability to win the game hinges on answering their threats and drawing cards that can impact the board of my own, because right now, I mean, we only have 1 card that can impact the board. And they do play an Orchard Spirit here turn 2, and suddenly I'm feeling great about holding that deadweight. Sometimes you don't bolt the bird, as it turns out. So we think twice, main phase. Hitting just Silent Departure. Now we get to go land, deadweight the Spirit. Think twice, hopefully going to dig us out of the mulligan a little bit. But the opponent has a Dark Thicket Wolf, and even though I'm feeling good about having played Deadweight on their Spirit instead of their Pilgrim, now I'm wishing I could have played it on that stupid Wolf instead. We draw an Island, which doesn't let us cast anything, and this is around the time I start wondering whether I was supposed to hold the Ghoul Raiser. I'm honestly not sure. I think you could. I also think it's super greedy to get rid of anything other than like Ghoul Caller's Chant. So yeah, maybe that was the play, but even if I had the Ghoul Razor in hand here. I still can't block that darn Dark Thicket Wolf. So we flash back the Think Twice, draw another land. Not really interested in more lands. Especially after winning that game with only 2 lands. Now we're starting to flood out a little bit. And they have Disciple of Gristlebrand. Not a card I like, but hey, you're also good players, so I'm expecting they'll have a good reason to have that in their deck. So we just go for a Silent Departure on the Wolf here, thinking that if the best thing the opponent had to do last turn was play the Disciple, probably makes sense that they'll just be pumping the Wolf this turn. Though, unless they wanted to have the Disciple's ability up to sacrifice things, the opponent actually made a kind of big misplay just looking back at this. They attacked with the Avacyn's Pilgrim when they could have just tapped it to get in 1 more damage by pumping the Wolf, so that's kind of interesting. So opponent attacks with their 1/1s. And the Wolf comes back. And yeah, still drawing lands, so time to flash back the Silent Departure on the Wolf. Opponent, another Abzan player, by the way, gets in for 2 damage. Dark Thicket Wolf comes down once again. We draw a Walking Corpse. Not the most exciting draw, though you have to wonder, maybe if we got rid of a land and we had the Ghoul Caller's Chant plus Ghoul Razor, now maybe we're able to do something kind of cool. But I still think we're losing by quite a bit versus just a Wolf and some 1/1s. So we're not blocking the Wolf here, which means it's dealing us some extra damage. And the opponent's passing, so it seems like they're pretty light on action as well. Get to play a Lantern Spirit here. It's not super relevant, but every now and then you want to hold up multiple instances of that bounce ability on the Spirit, because let's say you go to bounce it after like chump blocking the Wolf or whatever, and the opponent has instant speed removal. You want to be able to bounce it again in response to that removal. So at this point, I'm thinking I could either trade the Zombie and the Spirit for the Wolf, or I could just do the chump block trick. But the opponent doesn't give me that option as they play a Geist Catcher's Rig. Had to wonder if they had that on one of the previous turns and they were just saving it. I mean, blue-black, you're very likely to have hits for that thing. So this is technically a hit, even though it's really just like a 6-mana 4/5 Mana War, which is still not a bad card. Opponent comes in with the Wolf once again, doesn't pump it, plays a Hamlet Captain, and now we draw another land. So yeah, lots of lands, 9, a little bit more than the 2 that we had the game before. And remember, we can only play the Lantern Spirit out here. Both the Stitched Drake and the Chant would require a creature in the graveyard, and yeah, we don't have one of those. So I quickly look at the board, realize we blocked the opponent's 2 biggest things, and the Hamlet Captain still allows the 1/1s to deliver lethal. So if the opponent attacks with everything, we're just conceding. But let's see if we get any more information. They do realize they have lethal here if I have nothing, and yeah, that's enough for me to concede. Alright, game 2 of round 3 now. Get a very nice hand relative to the last one. We have an Interloper on 2. We can play Ghoul Razor on 3 if we'd like. We have Think Twice as well. Leading on Swamp, as we like to do. And jamming the Interloper. Now we have Walking Corpse, which is less mana efficient than the Ghoul Razor, but still fine to play that out before Ghoul Razor on turn 3. And oh, we do have the Ghoul Razor loop now, so we get to attack in the air for 2. And then we get to play Walking Corpse. Kind of annoying because it means we're not double spelling with Think Twice into Walking Corpse next turn, but it's still worth it because we can just chump block here, sort of time walking the opponent, then we can Ghoul Razor, get back the Walking Corpse, then we can just like start being silly with Ghoul Razors. but the opponent goes for the saddest travel prep of all time. Turn my 2/2 into a 3/3 with no flashback available. So I decide that, yeah, I'm okay taking this damage. We can just race if you're making this kind of play. And yeah, missing a land drop. Now we just get a Ghoul Raiser into play, attack for 4. This deck is not built to race, but if that's the kind of thing the opponent's doing, sure. Opponent plays a Hamlet Captain, doesn't attack with the Wolf, which means we are no longer attacking on the ground, but we are able to drop a Moon Heron here and attack in the air for 2. And Grimgrin might make an appearance. It's about time. Opponent mulches, finding, I believe, Triple Forest and Avacyn's Pilgrim. Unfortunately, of course, Pilgrim goes to the graveyard. They still can't attack, and they're actually discarding to hand size here. We draw Moan of the Unhallowed, and we attack for 5 damage in the air. Happens, and now we get to go Moan, setting up a really nice attack all on the next turn to hopefully end the game. Opponent plays an Ulvenwald Mystics, passes the turn, and let's do the math quickly. We take out 3 zombies, so only 1 gets through. 5 damage in the air plus 1 zombie is lethal, so we don't even have to show them the Falkenrath Noble. And we get to go to combat here to attack for lethal, and the opponent scoops it up. So yeah, very sad travel prep. Still no appearance from Grimgrin, unfortunately, but this deck is quite good, especially against slow starts. By the way, I will say I was very tempted to draw first in game 2. The main reasons I didn't are because it's terrible to draw first against Avacyn's Pilgrim and that Dark Thicket Wolf. Also just werewolves in general. You don't want to be drawing first versus them, even though the opponent's deck did seem a little slower. Yeah. So the opponent agrees with my choice as they choose to play first here. We get this nice hand, missing double black, but still 3 very nice spells and lands of both colors. Get to go Swamp turn 1. And Typhoid Rats, a little late to the party, but still better late than never. We jam our first 2/1 flyer into play. Opponent has a deadweight for it. Now we'll play our second 2/1 flyer. Opponent has Sever the Bloodline. Kind of funny. Spider-Man pointing meme with us having that card in our hand. So we go for a Think Twice here to see if anything changes. Nothing does, so we drop an island. And the rats. And very strangely, the opponent just passes. So now we get to go for an attack with the rats. And I reread this Morkrut Banshee in the spot because I wanted to see exactly how it worked, and unfortunately it does work the opposite of the way I'd like it to. So what I mean by that is this thing is not a May, it does not say up to 1. So if I play this Morkrut Banshee, and the only creatures on board are the Typhoid Rats and the Banshee, and the opponent, say, has a Victim of Night, well, suddenly the rats are going to die and the Banshee has to kill itself. So I decide that it's still worth adding to the board here, trying to apply pressure, but I am praying for no such blowout. And the opponent has nothing. And at this point I have to wonder if they have like a Geist Catcher's rig and they're getting super greedy, waiting for me to play a flyer. Speaking of which, I do draw Moon Heron here, still holding up the Victim of Night. Now the opponent goes for Sever the Bloodline flashback. Not much I can do about that. Alright, so we attack for 1. And then post-combat drop this Moon Heron. At this point we're going to hold 2 lands in hand, even though it is potentially relevant to get all of our lands into play, just because if we get Mind Rotted, it's pretty ugly. So they play a 0/0 Boneyard Worm, which is kind of hilarious, but also pretty sad. Enabling Morbid, presumably. And sure enough, they do have a Festerhide Boar. And in addition to that, they have a Prey Upon. And yeah, Victim of Night is going to be a nice 2-for-1 here. So I actually don't know about this Prey Upon play because we've been leaving double black up over and over. And I think if you're me, you're supposed to leave double blue up because that represents more counterspells. So I think it's pretty reasonable for the opponent to read me here for Victim of Night. But I'm not sure if they're supposed to say, hey, you know, some of the time my opponent has the Victim of Night, some of the time they don't, but I don't think I win the games where they have it anyway. But very happy that they went for this play, because now it feels like I'm firmly in the driver's seat, even as we draw a land here. 4 power still on the battlefield, Sever the Bloodline still in hand, opponent down to 9 life, with no board presence. They play a Disciple of Gristlebrand, and, card of the format, Spider Spawning. And just like the Boneyard Worm, it's a pretty sad spider spawning, making only 2 spiders. Kind of think the opponent was supposed to sack the Disciple to itself to make 1 more spider, because I think it would be better to have a 1/2 here than a 1/1, but maybe I'm wrong. I'm sure the Disciple is in their deck for a reason, like presumably Morbid, that kind of stuff. So end up playing the Walking Corpse here. Don't want to attack the Moon Heron into a couple spiders. It'll only trade for 1. And also, very annoyingly, we can't sever the Bloodline on the spider because they can just sack the one that's being targeted and then the sever is countered. So really unfortunate interaction here. We have the great answer to the spider spawning. And yeah, it's just not doing a whole lot. But can't really complain. Our deck is insane, and we do draw yet another great card, which is Falconwrath Noble. Now we start attacking. Maybe the rats should have attacked before, not totally sure. But at this point, yeah, just happy to get damage in however possible. So the opponent goes for a pretty reasonable double block on the Walking Corpse. We'll trade for 1/1/2, but we get 2 drains out of the deal. Now the opponent has to flash back the spawning to have a good block on the Moon Heron. That's pretty much the goal in our position, and they do flash it back. And now if they had sacked the Disciple earlier, they would have netted 1/1/2, right? Like they make a 1/2 when they cast it the first time, but then when they flash it back, they'd have made another. So it looks a little bit weird for them not to have done that, but works out pretty nicely against the Sever the Bloodline. And now we draw Murder of Crows, and the game is just so easy when the top of your deck is just perfectly stacked, right? So now we attack with our 2 worst creatures. Opponent goes for the double block on the Moon Heron. I think they should triple block there. I mean, it doesn't really change a whole lot, but I think they're supposed to triple block there. We trade for only 1/1/2. That's how it works. But we get 2 loots and 2 drains out of the deal. Ghoul Raiser, getting rid of an island. Oh, and there's a Silent Departure as well. Opponent down to a mere 3 life, almost just dead. And an Orchard Spirit now, which, although it can only be blocked by flyers or things with reach, it can't actually block flyers. So that's pretty nice for us. Now I'm trying to go for a Sever the Bloodline on the spiders, so we want to get that Disciple out of the way, which we will do with a Silent Departure. They can sack some number of other creatures, they can sack the Disciple to itself, doesn't really matter. Opponent's probably confused why we're doing this, as opposed to Departure Spider, Flashback, Departure Spider, but I think we're far enough ahead that we're fine to make this play. They don't sack anything, and we go for the Sever the Bloodline, targeting the spider, and that's it. So we never did draw and cast Grimgrin, which is a little bit disappointing, but this deck was super good. We managed to win a game on 2 lands. It's always really exciting when that happens. And yeah, just a really sweet deck that I wanted to share with all of you. So, thank you for watching this one. We'll be back again soon with more content. See you around.